We're going to have in the panel Svetlana Velikanova. Svetlana, hi. Co-founder and CEO of Harbour.Space. We'll have Anisa Al-Sharif, founder of Tanshia. We will have Executive Director of MIT Legatum Center for Development and Entrepreneurship, Dina Sharif. And finally, to moderate the session, we'll have Yasar Jarrar, Senior Advisor for the Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Innovations in Government. Thank you very much.
I think we're going to kick off now. I think there was a bit of a delay or a bit of confusion about the timing. I can see from the small numbers that we're going to have a very intimate conversation, but maybe that's better. Please jump in with any comments or thoughts about the conversation that we are about to have. And let me start very briefly by saying I will not introduce our speakers here because you have the pamphlets and the booklets with you. But we are going to jump in straight and have a conversation about education.
Can you hear?
You can hear me?
No.
Okay. So the acoustics are going to be a challenge. At least can you hear me vaguely? Okay, so we'll see how this will work. I can hear myself, which is always good. I like hearing my own voice. So what we're about to talk about today is education. And I think from our perspective sitting here, we have three different lenses to look at the world of education. Some of it from the higher education perspective. Dina comes at this from a very entrepreneurship pedagogy perspective and the experience they have in MIT trying to drive entrepreneurship. Svetlana comes at this from a fairly brand new university that has a different way of looking at things when it comes to content. And Anisa is looking at this from the K-12 perspective. And the basic premise I think we are about to discuss today is there seems to be something not working very well in the space of education. We keep reading these reports around the world, and especially from a regional perspective, about the lack of skills that are needed for employment, the ability to access proper education. Are we teaching our kids and the future generations the right skills, lifelong learning? So we have a lot of reports telling us what's wrong. And I think we work a lot with governments around the region, and they're struggling to find out what's right, in the sense that what are the models that can be put in place now to right these wrongs. So I'm going to start with my left with no particular order, with Svetlana, and let's talk about this brand new university, brand new in the age of universities around the world. Why did you start Harbour.Space? And what was wrong with the system that required a brand new university as opposed to working with the current systems and trying to improve what is already there?
I think that the main thing was the realization of the cost and quality ratio and the lack of universities that are very, very sophisticated, and the capacity of these universities to absorb more people than they currently absorb. And also, the difficulty of getting into this kind of universities. And, for me, great universities that at least, I follow and I adore are the Stanfords of the world, the Russell Groups of the world. But if you look at how many people actually study, even in Stanford, like the entire Stanford is just 16,000. Of how many people are studying currently at any given moment in time in the higher educational system, it's over 200 million people. And most of them study at really bad universities. That was the problem that, in the premise that I started with. And I said, I want to do it in such a way that university becomes affordable and that the quality of the university is great. And one last problem that we really wanted to tackle was to allow for inclusiveness, which means no matter where you come from Iran, you can come from Cuba, you can come from Russia, you can come from, whatever country. If you're bright, if you are motivated, that you have a chance to enter into a university, including that your fees are being waived and including that your living expenses are being covered fully. So that was for me the motivation. And also reduce the barriers to teaching, because a lot of universities, they're really strict on sort of who can teach whom. And I personally experienced firsthand that it's overly regulated in that sense, and so we also kind of found a way around it.
So that is not.
Such an unbelievable.
That is not the. Okay.
Yasar, I'm wondering if they can hear us.
Can you? Yes.
But
I can't hear very much, but that is not the sound of my brain waves going on, by the way. But I have a lot of questions for Svetlana about the model.
Can you hear it?
Okay, wave to us. It's always interesting when we talk about technology, the fourth industrial revolution, the future of skills, but technology doesn't work in terms of the mics and the PowerPoints. So bear with us. There is a world out there that is tech-enabled. I think I can hear my voice now. So the model you have done is trying to solve for the cost and quality equation. By the way, the Harbour.Space teaches a whole course for a whole year called Math as a Second Language. So anybody who wants to comment or ask or engage, please jump in. But tell us more about the model itself. What is so different? You don't do research, so this is a university that doesn't do research. And before I jump in, I'll prime you up for some space for entrepreneurship there. What is different about the model? Is it based on philanthropy? How do people not pay and get these best skills out there? Because that could be a replicable model for all the universities.
That was the idea. That was the idea that we can come up with something in terms of business that actually works financially and is scalable for many millions of people, if not billions of people, right? Because, I mean, everybody needs sophisticated education. And today we're talking about infinite loop, right? You never actually graduate. You always have to keep up. You always have to study. So, of course, the question remained, like, how can we do it in a sustainable manner and outside of the government framework, let's say? Is there a way to bring companies or to bring individuals on board with this? And the truth is, yes, there is a way. I mean, now, for example, Harbour.Space is opening in Bangkok on the 27th of January. We're doing it together with Thai Chamber of Commerce, with an existing university that decided that they want to disrupt themselves before anybody comes and disrupts them. It's a 20,000 student university with 50 years of history. And they're focusing on the jobs of the future, on sort of on everything that is needed by the industry today, and everything is being covered by the partner companies that are funding this project. And they benefit from what is different. So now, how it works? So the way it works is, you as a student, you even don't have to apply to Harbour.Space. In fact, if you're great, Harbour.Space is going to find you. I mean, hopefully, this is like one of the things that I work on every day is on the scouting process, right? So let's say I found you, and then, we do certain tests. We have a way to test, simultaneously over 100,000 people on more than 200 parameters. And of course, at least half of these parameters are hard skills. But we also don't just look at your GMAT scores. I don't care about your GMAT scores. I don't care about your TOEFL scores. What I care about is the official results in various Olympiads. There's, hundreds of things that I look at to make this decision. So let's say you're accepted. In this way, Harbour.Space offers you to come, either you're accepted and you don't want to work for anybody, then you say, okay, I'm just going to join Harbour.Space, and I'm either going to pay myself the whole tuition fee or partial tuition fee. Or if you say, unfortunately, I have no way to afford neither the ticket, and the first campus was in Barcelona in Spain, so let's say you cannot come to Spain, you don't have any money for the visa or for anything, so then Harbour.Space takes care of everything for you, including living allowance of about 1,000 euro a month. We waive the tuition fees for you, and we find you a sponsor that you work for 4 hours a day. So basically, by the time you finish, you don't owe anything to the company, but you worked, while you were studying. So at Harbour.Space, you study only one subject at a time, and you study 3 hours a day. So that's the difference, right? And you focus, again, as I said, typically on one subject at a time. We do have students that take 2-3 modules or courses at the same time, which is very unusual, but this allows enough time to practice what you're learning. So you typically are hired for what you're learning at Harbour.Space.
Okay, so the concept seems to be clear, something very difficult for a lot of the governments to play around with. So maybe we can come back and chat how can this be scaled around that. But I'm going to bring Dina in because I've known Dina for a long time. She's been a rock star in Egypt at the American University of Cairo. She disrupted many things she's worked with. But Dina has a view of we can disrupt and change this innovation in education from within. So the center you're working with and the work you are doing, can you tell us how you're looking at this problem of are we educating people the right way?
I honestly couldn't hear anything you said, but I'm assuming you're asking me how
Just
I
repeat
want
what
to
you told me before the program, but before the session.
how I want to disrupt higher
Do you want
education.
to try this one?
I think they can hear me. I just couldn't hear him. And then also, I'd love to hear from you more about why you chose no research in your university, which I find very interesting. I think Yasar and you and I spoke about it a little bit. I think we can't get rid of all the great universities that we have. So we're not going to get rid of the MITs and the Harvards and the American universities in Cairo. But I do think as educators, we have to change the way we teach. And so for the past 15 years, I've been very focused on using very different types of teaching pedagogies to cater towards the way people learn. And I started out by focusing on service learning. So how do we as faculty use experiential learning? This was at the American University in Cairo, by taking students out and having them serve to learn what they need to learn in class as a way to build up their character, but also to have them learn the technical things that they need to learn within the class. Over the past 8 years, I've been very focused on entrepreneurship education and entrepreneurial teaching pedagogies. So how do we, in the classroom, teach in an entrepreneurial way through gamification, experiential learning, bringing in people from the practical world into the classroom so that students can build up a variance of skill sets required for the job market. So I think employers no longer want technical skills, and this is probably very relevant to your work. They want to hire people with very high emotional skills. They want people who are creative. They want people who can problem solve. People can work in teams. And I think you get a lot of that through entrepreneurial education. You don't have to be an entrepreneur, but to have an entrepreneurial mindset and the skill sets prepare you for the job market. And I think that's what we as people in higher education institutions need to be thinking more about, how we can teach differently and how we can get our students to reach their maximum potential. And I have no idea whether you heard me or not.
So I heard enough to ask you, how far are we in the region from that? So there's a lot of money. We have some of the highest per capita spending in the GCC, for example, on higher education. And how far are we from teaching the right things for the current and future world? Because it's nice for MIT to do that, and there's the access issue. There's only so many people who can go there. What is the gap and how can it be plugged here?
No, we're very far in the region. You know, American University's Cairo is considered one of the elite universities in the region, and I would say that we are not advanced from a pedagogy perspective. We're not building character. We may be transferring technical knowledge, but young people today don't want to learn the way that we learned. You know, you and I, when we went to college, we attended lectures, we went home and we read and we studied and we took notes, and that's it. The youth now learn very differently because of the nature of how the environment that they're growing up in.
Yeah.
So I think higher education in the Middle East is not taking that leap into focusing on their faculty and how their faculty need to change, but also we're also not focused on cutting edge research. And I think that's where I'm very curious to know your model, because I think in order to prepare our students, we as universities need to be engaged in the latest and cutting edge research so that we can bring that to our classrooms. And I think we're very behind in that as well.
That our website didn't like what you saw.
Okay, so one thing I'm going to ask you all to reflect on at the end, and please jump in with any questions, just put your hands up or thoughts, is at the very end of the session, what are the opportunities for entrepreneurs to disrupt this from the outside in this region? So there's a huge gap. We're not doing the right things. We have a huge problem coming. We have the highest unemployment amongst youth in the world. So that's one thing we can boast in the region being number one at. So this is an opportunity and a problem. So in the entrepreneurship space where we are today, should be bells ringing across everybody's ears thinking, I can do something about this, there's money to be made, or there's social impact. So let's talk about that at the very end. But before we take another round of questions, Anisa, we had a chat before about how we prepare kids in schools today for this world. And is it technical skills? Are we giving them the right technical skills? You run a few social ventures. You used to be in government looking at this from a policy perspective. And now, as a mom, you have an experiment going on in your community trying to rethink how we educate kids. I want you to shed some light on that before we come in and talk about the policy implications of that.
So, I'd say if we're talking about redefining education, we need really to ask different questions than what we used to ask before. So the first question that comes to my mind, and which came to my mind when I became a mother, is employability, is the challenge that my child will be dealing with when she's as old as me. And I think looking at all the reports and what we kind of see, the change that we see now in the world, I think it's going to be really very naive to think that it is employability. All right, so we need to shift our focus from thinking that employability is the biggest challenge that we have today, or that the future generation would have. I'm reading a book now, which is very interesting. I think every entrepreneur should read it. It's called The Essentials of Theory U. So in this book, the writer identifies 3 challenges for humanity. All right? The first one he calls the ecological divide. And he puts a number for that. It's 1.5. So we consume, our economies consume the resources of 1.5 planets. The second challenge is the social divide. And he puts another number for that, which is 8. We have 8 billionaires today that owns the half of what all human or mankind owns on this planet. And the third challenge is the spiritual divide. And he puts another number to that, which is 800,000. 800,000 is the number of people who commit suicide, or we lose to suicide, every year. So the world is changing so much. And today, the 7-year-old who's in school now would be dealing with much more fundamental questions when they are in their 30s or 40s or 20s even. There is lots of things about how are we going to deal with this global environmental trauma that we have, what our relationships would look like, how are we going to organize ourselves as humanity and societies. So within all of this, employability becomes a very minor thing to worry about. So the question is really, how do we prepare kids to have the answer or to be able to navigate this world that we don't know how it will look like, right? And one of the things that we need to think of when we talk about these things is, do we educate them? The word education itself has a problem, as I think. It sounds like something that you do to someone. It's like from the outside. Even in Arabic, ta'aleem. It's something that you do to someone. It's like an empty vessel and you want to fill it with something. Versus a word like learning, for example, which is more something that comes from within, something that you do with passion, and which is much more aligned with the nature of us human beings. We are curious creatures. We want to experiment and learn. And children are born with this natural intelligence that makes them want to explore the world. From the very early on, when they're months old, a child sitting on her chair and dropping the spoon, and you give it back to her and she keeps dropping it. In her head, she's experimenting. She's asking the question, if I drop the spoon one more time, would it make the same sound? Would my mom or dad make the same expression? Will have the same expression on their faces? And it's actually up to us adults around this child to send them the signal to tell them that experimenting is safe or not. So if I go every time and pick the spoon and give it to the child and smile at her, I'm giving her a signal that experimenting is safe. If I get angry, or I think that she's naughty, or she's trying to test my patience, or whatever we call it, with time, she will get the message that experimenting is not safe. And we notice from research now that children start school very creative and with high level of curiosity, and it drops as they progress within the system. So the way that we've been doing policies actually has been, and it still is, within the walls of a school building. And this is where we're kind of defaulting nowadays. We're still recycling the same solutions again and again. But we're stuck in the middle of a circle where it's so crowded, and we're missing the opportunities outside on the edges of the circle, where all of this research coming, whereas lots of opportunities and lots of different ways of doing things and relating to our children. So going back to why are we doing this? So it's not employability. I think what we're trying to do here is nurturing the natural intelligence in a human being to reach to their fullest potential. This is it.
So I hope you all heard that, because she's living, Anisa's living this with her own family as well, and trying to educate her child differently outside the mainstream education. So you're all three of you are experimenting with education at different levels. And I'm not sure if it was by design, but I'm the token, if you haven't noticed, I'm the token male on this session, on this panel. So I'm just here to break the gender balance, I guess. But there's something to be said for the future of education is being, at least on this panel, experimented by, and I'm going to come back to the gender issue because we have a huge gender gap in the region. And I'll talk about that at the very end. But when we talk about all of these, it seems like these are still fringe or outside the system. So how can we scale something like Harbour.Space if it's working? Or how can we scale the out-of-school education process if it's working? And how do we know if they're working? How do you measure your success? Is it employability of your graduates?
Is it me answering?
Yes, well, yeah, please.
I mean, if you don't mind, I just wanted to say, in addition to what you mentioned, something like an anecdotal evidence. So we have summer camps for gifted children. We have technical track and we have creative track. And each track has 3 different levels. We have beginners, intermediate, and advanced. And it's not by age, this beginner, intermediate, advanced, it's by your executive ability, right? So if you, let's say if you're 11 and you qualify for an advanced track, you end up in the advanced track. And believe it or not, for example, in technical track, especially for programming, because in these camps we train world champions, or future world champions. We have kids that started programming at 3 years of age, and by the time they're 11, you know, they're programming way better than like 18 years old. And I'm used to this already, right? So, I mean, I'm working with these kind of kids. Now, in creative track last year, and the previous speaker here, Kamran, was judging. Kamran was one of the judges on the creative track of the camp. The winner was 12-year-old. The winner, there were actually 2 winners, both were 12-year-olds from the same school, and they won over 18-year-olds in the pitch competition, in the business competition. So I mean, it's what you're saying, what I've seen when I've experienced is I think we're treating the kids still too much like the kids without really appreciating what these kids can do nowadays, especially with all the social media, with all of these changes that when they're outside of the school and they're again allowed their gadgets, what they're learning there, and what they're not seeing in the school in terms of that kind of interaction. Hey, I have a question. I'm curious, right? Because in the internet, they get it right away. In the school, they're not supposed to raise their hand and speak. Everything that I've seen was like, hey, you're supposed to behave. Right, so the teachers that are collaborating with us on these camps are like shocked at what's happening with the kids. The kids are completely transformed after a couple of weeks. So this is just a side note. But answering your question was how to scale.
How to scale?
Or how do we measure success?
Well, both. How do you measure success? And if it is successful, how do you scale it?
I mean, I personally built Harbour.Space from scratch, right? So, like, how do you start a university? How do you build a university from absolute scratch, right? To aim to become Stanford of Europe or to aim to become another Stanford for the world in a lifetime, right? It's very difficult. It's mind-boggling. You think, how is it even possible to even start this, right? In fact, most of the success or most of the first couple of years funding came from students themselves. I mean, they actually understood what we were trying to do really well. We were very lucky. We were able to communicate that through our website. So whoever is interested in how to start a university, go to check out the Harbour.Space website and see what kind of messages we were sending, because these messages were really well received. And although the university, we started promoting it in an event like this, let's say in February, and in September we launched it, already with we had 13,000 applications. We launched it with 30 students. But anyways, I mean, it's the people themselves. And today, if you ask our students, even though some of them pay, they cannot imagine being anywhere else. So I think the quality aspect is having a tremendous sort of word of mouth. People nowadays, if they love something, they're going to go on Facebook, they're going to go on Instagram, they're going to call their friends, and they're going to make sure you're never empty. So for me, it's this. Of course, afterwards, it does help. I worked in investment banking, so I had a lot of, experience with talking to people with money, and I could explain the business unit economics, and I could explain the impact side of this investment, and I could get the first meeting, with important people. And then these people said, well, we think it works. Because, somebody across the world sends you 40,000 euros for 3 years at the university, which was like, that's incredible. Like, this is like 4 cars, right? So this is already kind of crazy. So I think quality, I think surviving the first few years, and then people talk about it.
Dina, please jump in.
I think I'm not going to talk to you about what success is for universities, because I think success is still very much related to grades and how the traditional forms of assessment. I can only talk about what success for me as an educator is when I have a student walk out and say, at the end of a semester, and say, because of you and because of this classroom, I feel like I am now able to meet my potential in a better way. But I just wanted to go back to your point about how this is a region that has the highest percentage of youth, the highest youth unemployment rates, the highest female youth unemployment rates, and one of the largest problems of employability in the world. So we know that education is important. We know that higher education is important for our youth, for the job market, but yet here we are, a panel about education that has really bad acoustics, not in the best of locations, but we know this is one of the most significant topics of the Middle East, which takes me back to your point of how do you scale this, or how do we transform this? We need policymakers to take it seriously. We need people in the private sector to take it seriously. We need philanthropists to take it seriously beyond the physical building of schools and universities, because at the very core of education is the educator. So I think I agree with you. There are problems with the term of, us feeling that only certain people can transfer knowledge. But the educator is still the core component of creating an environment that allows people to flourish and to thrive. So if we're talking about the Middle East and where we are in terms of education, we're extremely far behind. we're also not taking it really seriously either. And that is very clear from, where panels of education get put on agendas, where the discussions really are in reality, how seriously policymakers take quality, how celebrated educators actually are. Teachers and university professors are not the professions that are revered and in this part of the world. So we need to bring back that value so that educators take pride in being an educator, which will allow them to help the students thrive.
I have a problem with what you're saying, only one problem. I think that the teachers are completely at the core of any educational process, of any institution. However, the issue is their current half-life of knowledge, is like, in some professions like IT, is 9 months. So let's imagine you're a professor, you learned things 30 years ago, you're tenured, you work at a university, you don't know the recent stuff, you don't know anything, and because the university has you, the traditional universities, they have to structure the curriculum around the professors they have, right? So this is where we came in and we said, I actually have a problem with teachers just being teachers. I want my teachers to be at the forefront of, head of innovation of Microsoft or co-founder of the design studio. I want them to be where they are, but I want them to be able to take time off and come and teach, not because they do it for money, but because they're in love with what they do, because they have the passion, to do what they do. And then the students in these classes, they actually feel it really acutely, that this person knows what he's doing, what he's teaching me is cutting edge, and this person is in absolute love with this profession. And then they fall in love. I think that just traditional teachers, in that sense, are losing to the teachers that are actually very successful in the business, or at least there has to be a mixture of sort of both worlds in an institution, 100%. Nobody can convince you otherwise personally, but.
So I hope you can hear all of this because we have some great revelations happening. If you want to start a new university, you know where to go. And we are also discussing the value of the teaching profession now, and not the value of it, but the actual, how we look at it, and the half-life of knowledge, who should be teaching at Harbour.Space.
And how to teach.
And how to teach.
Because when you just take the traditional approach, when you just listen to what they say, it's 10% that you retain. So the retention is very low. Whereas if you apply what you hear, the retention goes 800%.
But the same applies to way below higher education, K through 12.
See,
and you're saying the best people to teach are the community.
Yeah.
You think of homeschooling. You don't like to call it homeschooling, but
we call it a learning community. But there is a lot of stuff here that it's kind of like I want to comment on. So let me try to organize my thoughts. We're talking about teaching, and this is very, very important. Like the individual who does this. But before we talk about teaching, we need to talk about learning. How do we learn as human beings, right? So children, and I just said that it is something we have built in us. We love to learn as creatures. But children, especially children, and it applies to adults as well, we learn when we feel the most safe. So children especially need to feel safe for their nervous system to be regulated and their thinking brain to kick off and start registering and building neural linkages. And so this is a relational thing. It happens within a loving relation. We can't learn from people we don't trust. We can't learn when we don't feel safe. And it is true for us. If I'm nervous, if I'm anxious, and I'm sitting here waiting for someone to evaluate me, I'm not going to learn. I'm not in my best self, So then we go and see how does this apply within the current education system. We have overworked, underpaid teachers. they are not even trained on this. Like some of the information that I've just said here would be new for any teacher. They don't know anything about the neurosciences, about social emotional intelligence, about how to connect to a human being. And they have 24 children in a classroom to fill in with information. And they're the weakest link in the system because everybody is pressuring them and they have to pressure the kids to perform as well. So this is one of the very biggest problems within the system now. If you bring back that relation, whether it's a parent or a teacher, but it happens within the relation with a child and parent and educator. In this space, in this safe space and loving space, learning happens.
This is beautiful.
At least the visuals work so I can see the time. We have time for one more comment. If anybody has a burning question, please jump in. But let me tell you the sad truth, reflecting on all this and genuinely thank you for all these thoughts. I work with most governments in emerging markets, all the way from Africa to our neighbors. I have not seen a public entity in charge of education have this kind of conversation.
No,
the sad truth is the conversations being had by people in charge of education are not at this level. We're probably improving buildings, we're adding iPads,
books.
We're teaching teachers to teach a little bit better, and we're worried about what do we do with them if we fire them because they were the highest employers.
Measures,
so
performance systems.
And they're the least paid public servants, by the way. In most countries in the region, almost everybody's paid more than a teacher. So this is a bit of a sad truth, but the opportunity is there, the need is there, and when there's a need and an unbelievably sad truth around the need, that says entrepreneurship to me. So what if somebody here who's about to start something, whether it's a social enterprise or somebody to make them a unicorn model, what are the opportunities from the outside the system to invest in some technology or some new ideas? Is it helping people teach outside the house, the mainstream school? Is it helping get some of these models off the ground? Is there a Harbour.Space opportunity to be had in every country? What are the wide spaces for entrepreneurs to jump in and help solve these problems? Because I can tell you, solutions will not come from governments. And if it's not governments and big corporates have a lot of things to worry about, they can do some CSR, it has to come from entrepreneurs. What are the wide spaces from some disruptors to come?
It's all a wide space. It's one big wide space.
It's one big wide space.
In the Middle East, it's one big wide space because if you look at education, the problems are related to access, the problems are related to quality and employability. So the opportunities are enormous in terms of using technology for access, but also using technology. I don't know, Anisa, this is more your area of how technology can be really used to create that kind of environment that you're talking about. I don't know if that's possible or not.
We're using less technology in our space, actually.
Yeah. You're shying away from the technology.
Yeah, I mean, how to put it? Information or knowledge has really zero value today. Any 7 years old, and you know this, can learn anything from YouTube. And I was in conversation with a friend of mine who teaches in university. She teaches here in Dubai and in Beirut. And she told me that her biggest challenge is how to convince young adults who she teaches that the first link or the first answer that Google brings to them is not the truth. You know? Because now it's so easy. And my child also, she's like, oh, let's Google it. The thing is, we need to try to, our challenge today is to build in a human being who is critical, has a critical thinking, who wouldn't take the first answer that come on Google and considering the truth. Someone who is well-regulated and have a very good value system, so when they get the information and the knowledge, they will do something good with it. That they won't use it to destroy humanity. They'll use it to give back and create something that's good, actually. And these kind of things cannot be taught. It can be mirrored. So I, as a parent, or I, as an educator, really need to have this capacity, a good value system, the ability to regulate my emotions, the ability to aspire to something higher. This is what everybody's talking about since this morning, finding purpose. What is my purpose here? And if I don't have it, if the educator doesn't have it, we can't pass it on, we can't mirror it to the children. And to answer your question, how can we scale it? I think we shouldn't be scaling it. Because it's the thing that I was just saying, it happens in this relationship, and it needs to be very individualized and personalized for each single child. Government policymakers need just to have the infrastructure there to enable communities and maybe social entrepreneurs, which is very loosely defined, I don't know, to experiment. And there are lots of models, pedagogies out there for alternative education, but how to organize ourselves as society in a way that works for us, for our value system and what we want to create in this space and this relation with our children.
I think the good news is that, like, for example, in my opinion, just to add to what you said, I think everything you said will happen. In my opinion, everything will be personalized very soon. So I give it like maximum 7 to 10 years. Education for every person will be personalized, 100%. I'm a huge believer in that. And what education will go through as a system will be the same what the transportation sector went through. So democratization will come to the educational institutions, whereby each and every pupil will be able to choose his or her own itinerary plan, experiment, change the plan. You know, like we already do this at Harbour.Space. Every single student can take a course for 3 days and afterwards decide whether you want to stay or not, or you can change the entire learning plan every 3 weeks. And this will happen, definitely. So there's plenty of opportunities to make technology help us to run this very heavy operational model, because it is heavy operationally to cater to every kid and to actually feel, preserve the cost equation and at the same time bring a lot more quality into educational system. It definitely is a challenge. But to be honest, I think things are looking really bright. So whoever is interested in sort of, disrupting the world of education, even, I can give...
It's already happening.
It's happening.
I mean, here in Dubai and Northern Emirates, we have 700 families who are homeschooling their children in different ways and models. So it's not something that's like...
So on a positive note, I think we have the need, we have the issues. We talk about disrupting education, but it seems like the old education system is gonna, in the next 7 to 10 years, just fade away. It will become irrelevant. Even if we keep doing it, it will become irrelevant. It's already happening. Parents are taking control. New universities are coming up. We were having a conversation a few weeks ago in Dubai about what they called very aptly the post-job economy. How do you run a society and an economy where there's very few number of jobs and a lot of people? So thank you very much, ladies. If you got 50% of this conversation, it must have been very valuable, because I really enjoyed this. And thank you very much, ladies, for your time. And thank you for being with us. And